This is Richard Wolff with another Wolff Responds for Democracy at Work. In light of the impeachment proceedings, the second one against former President Donald Trump, I wanted to draw a historical comparison to underscore an aspect of all of this that is not getting the attention it deserves. And I want to call this discussion, this brief discussion, Communists Then and Proud Boys Now. I want to draw a contrast between what happened to communists after 1945, and particularly from 1945 to roughly 1960, those 15 years, with what is being discussed and considered in relationship to groups like the Proud Boys today. Other groups as well, but I'll use them as the general case. Here's what I want to stress. The communists, and by that I mean the leaders and active members of the Communist Party of the United States, after World War II ended in 1945, were suddenly and dramatically demonized. Here's the reality of what happened then. The Communist Party had grown spectacularly, as had socialist parties and union movements during the Great Depression of the 1930s. And during that time, the Communist Party was a leading member of the New Deal coalition, that coalition of socialists, communists, and labor unions grouped in the CIO that helped bring us the New Deal, the Social Security system, federal unemployment compensation, the nation's first minimum wage, and the public jobs for 15 million Americans that transformed their experience of the Great Depression. Not only were the communists growing and looked upon in large parts of the United States very favorably, but this was followed by World War II. From 1942, roughly, until the end, 1945, the United States was officially allied with the Soviet Union, so that the Communist Party, with its traditional relations with the Soviet Union, was now a loyal part of the alliance fighting fascism in Germany, Italy, and Japan. So from being a part of the national effort on many levels for a long time, 1945 changed everything, and the communists were switched literally overnight from allies, from militants, from people pushing into people who were untrustworthy, disloyal, and dangerous. Communist leaders and activists were hounded out of their jobs by the FBI. They were arrested. In the Smith Act trials, the leaders were imprisoned. When the government could do it, it deported immigrants who had been active with the Communist Party, and quite a few who hadn't been but were caught up in guilt by association. The whole period got a name after the senator who was particularly aggressive in using the government against communists and socialists, Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy. It came to be called McCarthyism. It lasted at least 70 years, 1945 to 2015, 70 years of relentless anti-communist activity, persecution, imprisonment, you name it. Teachers lost their jobs. The whole Hollywood experience was transformed as people were thrown out of the Hollywood movie industry if their politics were considered too close to those of the Communist Party. And what was said as the bad thing the communists had done? Well, the phrase that came to be the key one was that if you were a member of the Communist Party, the government considered that you, quote, advocated the overthrow of the United States government by force and violence. And that was the reason you were subject to the arrests and the deportations and the imprisonment and the loss of your job, etc. Here's the important point. No communist party, officially or unofficially, ever did anything like attack the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. They did organize demonstrations in various parts of the country, but they were almost always very peaceful. And even when there were some incidents, they had nothing in common with what the Proud Boys and other groups like that mounted on January 6 of 2021, the basis in good part for the impeachment effort around former President Trump. They never did what the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and a whole bunch of others just did. Will they then, history asks, be subjected to anything like the governmental onslaught, deportation, arrest, imprisonment, job loss for 70 years? Ask yourself that question, because if the answer is no, then we have a bizarre problem, don't we? That our reaction to the left wing, which never mounted an assault that killed and terrified our elected leaders and the public and the Capitol Police and others there to guard them, we treated the people who never did anything like that very, very harshly. What will we do to those at the extreme other end of the political spectrum now that they have shown a willingness to consider overthrowing the U.S. government by force and violence in a way nobody has ever done before, including the persecuted communists after World War II? This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work.